Hi, and welcome to another edition of Newsmakers. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Thursday, April 28th. We're doing a day early so we can get to the key Women in Communications luncheon tomorrow. And we are joined by our panel of top local journalists, Nick Welsh, executive editor and prize-winning columnist for the Santa Barbara News Press, Jade Martinez-Pogue of KEYT, and Josh Molina. Did I get your name? Did I do a dyslexic? I mean, did I? I did. Anyway, Jade Pogue Martinez, excuse me.
No, you got it right the first time.
Oh, I did.
I think Nick works at the Independent.
You slandered Nick.
All right, I'm starting over. We're joined by
I work at News House. I'm the executive editor of News House.
Nick Welsh, executive editor and prize-winning journalist at the Independent. Jade Martinez-Pogue, right?
Yes.
Of KEYT. It's been so long since you were on. And Josh Molina, international man of mystery and Santa Barbara's answer to Joe Rogan. Okay, we start today Jade's long-awaited series on the problems with mental health care and critical healthcare beds in Santa Barbara. Part 2 has published, part 1 is published, and we're waiting for part 3. But basically, I think the story to date, Jade, if I could just summarize it, it's, there's a lot more demand for these mental health facilities than we have. Talk about some of the numbers and some of the impacts.
Yeah, so we have 16 beds at our psychiatric health facility, which is a public facility. So people without private insurance, that's where they would go. The county would take care of them. And the capacity is nearly almost always full. It's 16 people almost all of the time. So when someone is on a 5150, which means, they've deemed a danger to themselves or to others, and they have to be watched. It's an involuntary hold for 72 hours. If someone is on one of those and they either need to stay on it or, they need the proper care to help them, they would in theory go to the psychiatric health facility. But because there's only 16 beds, what's happening oftentimes is that these people are waiting in emergency room departments for hours. I talked with the doctor at Marion, and I think the longest time someone has been in there is over 170 hours, an insane amount of hours. And it's the same emergency room that you would go to if you broke your arm or you got in a car accident, but these beds are being occupied by people who need inpatient acute mental health care because there's nowhere else for them to go. And what happens in some cases, if there's no room at the psychiatric health facility, they'll get transferred to our sister contract hospital in Pasadena, which is far away. So that poses an issue to itself.
But that's often full as well, according to your report.
Right. And so what happens when that one is full is they're sent wherever in California that someone can take them. That's LA or San Francisco, Bakersfield, anywhere that has a bed.
So
and because, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
So for those patients who don't go to our hospital or to the one that we pay for in Pasadena, the county is paying way more money to send them somewhere else than.
Yeah, I think you said between 550 and 1,200 something a night or a day, which you can get.
What happened to Vista Del Mar in Ventura?
Yeah, so I know that part of that burned down in the Thomas fire, I believe. So we don't contract with them anymore. I know
that got rebuilt. It's better. It looks better now than ever.
I know that they send children under the age of, or I guess people under the age of 21 to the one in Ventura, but it's not a contract hospital. So we don't have any sort of partnership with them. So that costs just as much as it would to send them to San Francisco.
Okay.
All right, there's a lot to unpack here, but this 16 bed thing, which I just thought was sort of random, but it affects what, Medi-Cal? If you have more than 16 beds, you can't use public insurance for it?
So Medi-Cal or Medicaid only reimburses the county for up to 16 beds. It's I forget the exact legislation. Believe it or not, I wrote these stories kind of long ago. But it's some federal legislation passed decades ago that said that they can only reimburse up to 16 beds. And so it's not an easy solution to where the county can just open another bed or build another hospital. There's stuff that's outside of their control.
Yeah. Nick, you've done a lot of reporting on this. Why aren't we building more? Why don't we have more? And wouldn't it be cheaper to kind of build our own rather than do all this sending people hither and yon?
Well, they haven't done it. I mean, what's interesting, Jay brought up, there's a federal rule that prohibits anything more than 16 beds or you don't get reimbursed. And that rule was created to prevent the building of these sort of big warehouses from the 1970s and the 1960s and before, sort of the shock corridor type warehousing. And but the problem is, for the past 40 years, Santa Barbara County grand juries and mental health advocates have been saying 16 beds is not enough. And they go to the supervisors say, yep, you're right. And so they've tried to come up with all these other ways to skin the cat where, oh, we'll put you somewhere else. We'll get you before you're so far gone that you need to be 5150. But it really hasn't worked. I mean, they have succeeded in finding all these other places to put people sort of less acuity, but
it's
once you get to that
fingers
level,
in the
16
fingers in the dike. It's not really addressing the core of the problem.
it's just I think that the licensing aspects of it and the cost aspects of it are really quite prohibitive. One thing to note is that the county, for the first time ever, has asked for a waiver of this, so that would allow them to have more than 16. So they have to go on bended knee to the state, and then the state mental health advocates have to say, okay, this is cool, and then they take that on to the feds. So for the first time ever, they've gone to the state, and the state said, we're going to process this waiver application.
Oh, well, that's something.
That is like such a small step, but it's the first time they've ever taken it. I mean, one of the other things that jumped out at me in your stories, Jade, was we are the only county in the state where law enforcement officials do not 5150 people.
Yeah.
And that's because we have such a tiny PUF unit where we can't, because if they could, we'd be in a much worse shape than we are right now.
Yeah. Hey, Josh, just as a journalistic matter, I know you read Jade's stories closely line by line. And at the bottom of the first story, she quotes an emergency room doctor who says, the system is collapsing around us. Don't you think that should have been the headline on the piece or even possibly the lead?
Well, Jerry, I was just thinking, isn't this the part of the show where we cue you to blame Doss Williams for why this is the way that it is? No,
I'll be glad to do that if you.
No doubt, Jerry. If you and I ran a newsroom, man, the headlines you and I could come up with for these stories and the entry points and the
I didn't write the
heavy
headline.
breathing.
No, that was a great quote though. And it just because it captured the whole story. And I think, the urgency of it.
No, if you're an ER doc and you're dealing with this population and these people who are so upset and you don't have a place to put them, the consequences are heinous. I mean, there's this dance that they go to, so they try to release them back to county behavioral wellness. County behavioral wellness isn't exactly an easy bureaucracy to navigate. I did a story a while back about a guy who had checked himself into the ER 3 times for 5150, but he wasn't deemed far gone enough. So they released him and he went home and he stabbed himself 24 times. And, you know, it was a suicide. It was one of those stories where he'd been trying to get checked in.
Yeah, is this connected to our homeless situation? I mean, is that people who, you know, say the 72 hours expires or something and they have nowhere else to go? Did you find any connection, Jade?
I didn't look that much into that, but that's my third story is actually about the CSUs. So if that was the situation, you know, crisis
And the
stabilization.
CSUs are what?
The crisis stabilization unit, so they can provide up to 23 hours of care. It's supposed to be short term, less intense, but it gives people, you know, a place to be with food. There's showers if they need to. I think coloring pages, you know, just a place where they can kind of collect everything and recenter themselves. And so in theory, if that was the case, you know, if someone's 72 hours expired, they could go there to also have shelter in a sense too. That's what they were looking for.
All right. Well, Jade, congratulations on finally getting it published, and we'll look forward to part 3, I guess, tonight. Really good stuff. And
Yeah, really, really good. And well, I was just curious, what was the hardest part of doing this for you?
getting
I
it
think-
published.
I think the hardest part was honestly the interviews. I think in the first 2 stories, I was only able to use, you know, 2 interviews that weren't professional or expert sources. And I interviewed over 20, 30 people who talked for like multiple hours. And unfortunately, there are so many problems with our mental health system. Very few of the interviews I could actually use for my specific topic and what I was writing about. But I just hearing about all the problems and how it affects people and how it affects their families and how it changed their life. There was a whole week where that's basically all I was doing was those interviews. And that was pretty hard.
No, you know what was really good though, one thing I thought was great about it was that because there's that mass of stuff and because you ingest all that information, you have sort of a sense like I have to tell everybody, but your stories were enough that you could absorb it and get the main point without being overwhelmed by it.
Yeah,
That's a really hard balance to get.
And that's how we do things at Newshawk, Nick, just FYI.
What's that?
That's how we do things at Newshawk, FYI. Just
Well, Nick was briefly working for Newshawk today. I guess.
Yeah, well,
No,
that was the executive editor there.
No, you had him working at the News Press, Jerry.
Yeah,
You didn't
Oh, I
say
said that.
Newshawk.
Oh, even better.
Can I just say one thing real quick?
Yeah, please.
I want to acknowledge
I
Nick
want to ask you
Welsh.
about another story. Go ahead.
I want to acknowledge Nick Welsh, though. He has reported on this topic for years and has done a tremendous job of this, covering this story. And Jade did an excellent job with this and being able to break it up into 3 parts and to do it in a way that she did, which was accessible in a way people can understand. And I think that the next time the LA Magazine or some other out-of-town place comes up with some half-baked story and everyone in town says, why doesn't Santa Barbara do investigative journalism? I'd like to point out to those 3 individuals who were texting this to everybody, that ridiculous story. This is investigative journalism done by a young journalist who did a great job. So please stop saying there's no investigative journalism in town. And Jade, I liked your photo with day 1 of the woman. It's really hard. People don't understand this. people don't want to go on the record with their full names, their identities. These are very sensitive issues. And Jade got creative and had this really cool shot of the back of, I think it was a mom sort of walking. And so it showed she's a real person, but it was artsy and a very good image. And as we have to be jack of all trades in 2020, we have to write, take photos.
And even more so in 2022. Gosh.
Hey, I'm just trying to make you look better, Jared. That's all.
I think you've succeeded. Jesus. All right. Hey, Josh, speaking of mental health, now watch this transition. Apparently there's a lot of anxiety, depression, and other problems emerging in young kids, which some people in the Santa Barbara Unified School District, parents and doctors, are blaming on the iPads, the free iPads that were given out during the pandemic when the schools were closed. But now people are pushing back against that. What was that about, that little scoop?
Well, yeah, well, some pediatricians and some school psychologists have been speaking at the school board meetings the last couple of times they've met, talking about how the district should take back the iPads that they gave out to children second grade and under during the pandemic. They say that there are no controls over this, and increasingly parents are using them. And they're also saying that there's no real way to monitor what kids are looking at and using them for away from school. The pediatricians also say they're seeing childhood obesity increase, or I should say less ability to focus and pay attention to detail, and depression. And they're saying the district should think about pulling back here and re-looking at this iPad plan. They also go a step farther and say they don't want kids to have access to YouTube, because they were saying that how you, Jerry, might go onto Google and search for something because you don't know the meaning of a topic or a word. Kids are doing that on YouTube, and they're coming up with like video images. And so they're pushing hard on the city, on the school district, but they seem to be pretty reasonable, thoughtful, organized. Yeah. They're not heavy hitting. They're just asking for a conversation on this topic.
And the school board, I guess, agreed to put it on the agenda for next time.
Yeah, so it'll be on the agenda coming up.
And I mean, it also seems like it's part of a broader problem that you've heard a lot about in public comment, really, which is just the whole overall impact of so much screen time on young minds. And the other element of it was that they were asking for was a policy or something that would be sent to parents to help monitor the amount and what it is that are being watched.
Yeah, they want some sort of training. They want the parents to have some training on how to monitor the use of the iPad and what their children should be doing and not doing. And I talked to, what's great about this is that this is a Santa Barbara Unified School District psychologist using her own name and coming forward. This is a Santa Barbara County Public Health Department therapist who is our pediatrician, who's coming and using their name. And they're using examples of what they see in terms of treating people. And they say that, in treating these young kids, they're just seeing all kinds of effects of them relying on this instead of exercising and getting out and doing things. So I think that's remarkable, is that these are not anonymous sources who are just bickering at the school district and complaining about parliamentary procedure. These are people who are willing to talk about these issues in a serious way. They have a whole list of pediatricians. There's like 100 names.
Yeah. Yeah. Nick, you're the only one with me who remembers what it was like to do reporting before the internet. And I would say I had less anxiety and depression from before I started spending 8 hours a day online, something. So Nick, and on the Commission on Commissions, the Foundation Commission for the police review matter in the city, they finally went before the council with their, I guess it's still a draft plan for what to do, and it had mixed reviews.
Yeah, it is, they finalized a proposal. The commission, the Community Formation Commission came up with a plan and a proposal that they took for the first time to the city council last Friday. It was interesting. Mayor Randy Rouse decided he didn't want to have the meeting in the regular council chamber, so he had it held at the Gephardt meeting room, which everybody's at the same level. So you're not up on the dais the way you are at a regular council meeting. It was really just to hash stuff out. And they had a conversation more than a deliberation. And it was really interesting. It was kind of remarkable in sort of the emotional cathartic exchanges that actually took place that you wouldn't have, I don't really remember seeing before, where you had council member Alejandro Gutierrez ask Gabe Escobedo, who is the chairman of this commission, did you ever really put yourself at risk here? And not your typical question. And Gabe Escobedo recounted how when he was growing up, his father was behind bars most of the time. He was raised by basically a single mom as a result, and he didn't have good feelings about law enforcement. And that he was afraid to be in a room with a cop wearing a badge with a gun. And he was actually really anxious about that. And so we went on, and Alejandro then shared how she had, even though that she has a uncle who is a police officer and a uncle who is running for sheriff, and a friend who's a cop, she has very mixed feelings about police officers too. And in fact, the officer in question, Lieutenant Sean Hill, she was going to write him off. She said, I was just going to write him off. But then, he showed up at a meeting not wearing a uniform. So it was all this sort of touchy-feely stuff, but it was also kind of interesting and maybe useful in terms of bridging the sort of ideological rigidity of
Well, yeah. And the key issues seemed like A, cost, and B, whether there's going to be a new position created for an auditor to look at complaints on police. And I guess the other big issue, which was, whether anybody from law enforcement could serve on the commission, I guess that's been resolved. But the other two things, what they sent Gabe off to talk to Chief Malekian.
So the idea is that they really want Gabe Escobedo to meet with the acting police chief Barney Malekian to see if they can't work something out. They're seemingly, they seem to be pretty close, not real close, but pretty close, and they should be able to work something out. Gabe, it should be noted, he is one of 11 members, and he can't just unilaterally cut a deal. And it's also worth noting that the Formation Commission really did modify in a lot of ways from its earlier posture. They did allow members, they changed it from, we don't want anybody with any law enforcement background serving on it, period, exclamation point, or anybody that ever dated one, to they would allow people with law enforcement life experience, but only if they were not they hadn't served in Santa Barbara County, and only if it was like 7 years retired or more, which amongst the police officers still seemed unnecessary and exclusionary, but it was a shift. Initially, it was, we're going to have two people. One is going to be like an executive up there, like a department head with a staff. And that has now been sort of whittled down to one staff person who could be a contract employee.
Yeah.
So they're getting there.
All right. Hey, Josh, and in terms of the politics of this, yeah, I mean, it wasn't all kumbaya to me. I mean, there's still people who oppose this, right? Where there were business representatives, and I guess the POA is still against it. And Randy Rouse, when he ran for mayor, was pushing back on the whole idea a little bit and really defending the cops. So how is he finessing this?
Well, I think where we're at today is quite different than where we were if we look back when Healing Justice was pushing for this as one of their demands. It'd be really interesting to know how they feel, because
They didn't show up to testify?
Some members called in, and at least one that I remember called in and was very critical of the board of the commission, and the not, I should say, critical of the law enforcement that spoke. But
Hey, Jade's
Yeah,
gotta go. Our lunch hour is
Bye.
over. Thank you so
Jade,
much.
thank
and
you very
really
much. Nice
good
to
work.
see you.
Congratulations, Jade. Thank you.
you.
And thanks for coming back on the show.
Always.
And tell Jim Lemon over there that, to be nice to you, give you a big raise, and, your time is better spent on Newsmakers than over there anyway.
I'll let him know. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
I was just going to real quickly say that this was such a nice meeting. The commission, Gabe, he had totally been disarmed. Everybody seemed to be in a place where they could accept some form of review. And it was very different than when Kathy was mayor and when this thing first started. Two different worlds almost. That being said, to your point, yes, was it some of the retired cops, Hans, Greg
Greg
Hans
Hans.
spoke. He spoke and said this is a solution, looking for a problem. I think it was Beecher spoke and talked about how this is unnecessary. There were some conservative members of the community who spoke and said this was a bad thing. They seem like they're on the outskirts, quite frankly. And I feel like Randy can support something. He can support what Gabe and the commission came up with. I feel like that's where it's headed. The truth is, though, it's a much more calm, sort of less tense environment than when it was first proposed. At least that was
That was, it was right after George Floyd, and I think the whole political environment has changed so much. I mean, unfortunately, we're not hearing a lot about racism and anti-racism and what we're doing about that these days. Hey, Josh, you had one that I figured you were going to try to publish with a pseudonym in the Montecito Journal about the people on the road by Hot Springs Trail who are now suing the city on the parking changes they've made.
Yeah, 4 homeowners are suing the county because the county is looking to create up to 62 parking spaces on Mountain Drive and other areas near the Hot Springs Trail. And so the county sent some letters to some property owners, different than the ones who are plaintiffs right now, saying you need to clear your debris, your signs, your boulders, because you put it illegally in the right of way. And
they put it there specifically so people couldn't park in front of their houses, right?
Yeah, that is the contention. And then these homeowners heard about that, and they're in a similar position, and they hired Barry Capello, and they filed it's not a lawsuit, but it's a request for a hearing to stop this, an injunction to stop this order from the county. It's a big issue out there. This is a very big issue for the people of Montecito, the homeowners there. People love to hike. It's a popular trail. There's no place to park. I double parked when I did my story. Fortunately, I got out of there without a ticket. But it's not like you could just go park on the next block over there. It's like,
and it's gotten worse since the pandemic. I mean, it appears there's more people using the trail, huh?
Yeah. So there were some Hot Springs viral social media videos on TikTok. So you've got a lot of the Ventura, LA people, and the people I talked to on site said, we don't want more parking. Even the people who couldn't find parking and waited for a space, they like it. They think it'll ruin the area. So this is a contentious debate. The county, their side of it is, look, you are taking up public right-of-way space. You don't have.
Hey, remind me who the supervisor is. Who
Gary, you were slipping.
Who represents this area? And,
One of your close personal friends,
and what,
right?
and so what's he saying about
Well,
it? Well, I know what he's saying. Let's grow some weed there. That's probably,
I didn't have a comment from him in my story, so I don't know what he is saying. You know, I think that the general perspective from them is these homeowners shouldn't do this, and the law, the legal action that the homeowners are taking is saying you need to do an environmental review. You can't just go up there and start adding 62 parking spaces. And I think the county would say, hey, we don't, 62 was a maximum, we weren't going to do that. But they're saying you can't just do this. There needs to be some community input, some environmental review. It's not an issue that's going away at all.
and
It's been
especially,
ongoing.
you know, that they hired Capello. I mean,
That is such an atom bomb. First of all, you hire Barry Capello. Secondly, you demand an EIR for on-street parking for people who want to use a public trail. But it is a problem, and Josh is right. I mean, if you have all this sort of social media hyping this trail, the other thing that's new about the trail is that, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago, water that had previously been diverted is now not being diverted. And so you have pools that we haven't historically had there. So it's like, wow, it's like a real creek as opposed to this sort of ribbon of drool. And so there's a real attraction there. And people are coming. And it is a wonderful mess. And I don't think, I mean, I kind of wonder, well, why don't they have shuttle parking of some sort? I mean, if the people of Montecito can hire Barry Capello, they can probably afford shuttle parking.
Yeah, all right. Well, Nick, Josh mentioned TikTok, and we're all looking forward to your TikTok channel. And it would have been useful when you went up to the Freemasons Hall this this week on a really quite intriguing shaggy dog story. What were you doing at the Freemasons?
You know what? You know how they
What?
say there's certain buildings in town. Okay, here's what triggered it. Truly, in 1 week, I had 3 people approach me and tell me, Nick, you know, you think things are bad now, and it's going to get worse. And you know who's at fault? The Freemasons. And then that was one guy who used to work as the independent, and he would take care of my computer. And then I was here on a Saturday, the doorbell rings. There's a nice guy out front, has got some artwork. He wanted to let me know about the Freemasons. And then, of course, there's boat rat Max Kilrain, who ran for mayor.
Who's a loyal viewer?
He filed an 81-page lawsuit against the city and a transgender person who uses a bathroom down by the city waterfront. And it was all about the Illuminati and Freemasons. And I know 2 women who are speech therapists who provide classes on the 4th floor there. So I called them up and I said, what's the deal? And they said, well, why don't you come on over and you can meet. So I mean, it was so hilariously.
I did not, you know, that building, I mean, the picture, it's really an interesting building. And where is it?
Really, it's the building where Santa Barbara Bank and Trust used to be. Now it's Union Bank, 16 East Carrillo. It's right downtown. It's like this amazingly beautiful building that
I must have walked past it a million times.
You walk past it and don't see it. And it's a building where time forgot, right? You go inside it and you're sucking amber of like 1940. It was built in 1924. And so I go in there and I have this wonderful meeting with Maurice, who is the head of the local Freemasons. It couldn't have been more hospitable, and they have a stage. They have, you know, back in the 1940s, they had like 25 Hollywood script, you know, scene painters show up, and they did backdrops that, you know, of various sceneries that they use at the Freemason temple.
What was the
Uh,
guy? What's the guy's name? Maury?
Maurice.
Maurice.
Hey.
But he also acknowledged to you that they have secrets.
Oh,
And-
yeah.
Yeah.
He had the greatest line. He said, "We are not a secret society. We are a society that has secrets."
Yeah, there you go. All right, we gotta get
Jerry,
going.
I just gotta say one thing. I was standing out. I used to work at the Pacific Coast Business Times for 4.5 months before I bolted. And I used to talk right in front of that building, in front of the Freemason building. And I got kicked out. I would do phone calls down there and I would lean against the pole right in front. And they came out and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said,
Was it Maurice, do you think?
No, it was not Maurice. It was another individual who I do know, who I won't name, who said, you can't be here. You got to move on. You know, it's like, this is but I guess I was on their property. But yeah, so maybe I don't know. They welcome you, Nick, not me. This is part of the conspiracy, I think.
It's all part of
No,
it.
it was clearly part of the conspiracy. And I guess the whole point of the column was we don't need those stinking conspiracies to do ourselves in, because we're plenty stupid and willing to do it our own self. And if you look at the number of deaths that took place in America in the second year of the pandemic after we had the vaccine, there was more deaths after we had the vaccine than before because of vaccine resistance. So it was really complete.
Vaccine resistance, as you point out, primarily by white people.
White people. What we don't have is
Fox News.
trusted messengers for white people. You know, we don't have trusted messengers for Republicans. That's what we need.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of places that are preserved in amber, Josh, your piece on the latest fulminations over De La Guerra Plaza, I guess it seemed until the end of your story, everyone was getting along. And then Lanny Ebenstein kind of crashed the party and said, you know, we got to keep the law. And we ran an op-ed from Lanny a couple of days ago about that. But is that going to be a killer issue?
This is a big issue for Lanny. He really believes the grass should stay, all of it, if not most of it. And he's taking action with this committee to save De La Guerra Plaza to have the plaza declared some sort of landmark, which would force an environmental review. I mean, think about what they want to do. They're calling it a bubbler now. They went from calling it a splash pad to a water feature to a bubbler. They want an arcade, which now they're calling a pavilion, which they don't seem to like at all. Like one of the board members called the design an insult to arcades. And so they want that. And they want to redo the whole area and make it flat. It's going to be dramatically different. And it's part of Santa Barbara's efforts to sort of clean up these dead spaces. And Lanny's saying this is grass. This is a Spanish plaza. This is what this should be. It should not be hardscape. So he's gonna go down fighting. And we know we can underestimate Lanny, but we shouldn't. He's very smart.
No.
He's
This is the deal. You are so right. I mean, the first time the city tried to float a bond to build a new police station, Lanny stopped it. When they wanted to build widen the bridge going into Mission Canyon, Lanny stopped it. Now he's not alone. When you look at the district redistricting that took place at the county, Lanny had a major role in how the results played out. So I would not underestimate Lanny's effectiveness here. And I would say that he's willing to take this all the way down to the bitter end. People have been arguing about how to figure out how to change De La Guerra Plaza for over 100 years, and they've never figured out how to come to an agreement that everybody can live with. They aren't going to come up with an agreement they can all live with. And if I was going to put my money on down the table, I'd be banking on Lanny Ebenstein on this one.
That's exactly what I emailed Josh this morning. I said, take it to the bank. Lanny's going to blow this up. And of course, there's one special tenant or not a tenant, but an occupant of of De La Guerra Plaza. Have we heard from that person, Josh?
Last time I asked, and I'll be very careful here and how I report this, but last time I asked an elected official, I was told that they're just not responding to any of the letters or requests for a conversation.
Are we not speaking about Wendy P. McCaw and the news press?
Yes.
You
Yes.
can, Nick.
Well,
They-
I mean, that beautiful building is, that's
Well,
essential.
Randy Rouse, I think, had been trying to use his friendship with Arthur von Wiesenberger to get some kind of a response. But what I've heard is that not even Randy can penetrate the North Korean cone of silence that emanates around Guerra Plaza.
All right. All right. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Josh. Who's on the podcast?
Well, Jerry, we're recording early, so I don't have a guest booked. I don't shift it into gear till.
It may be time to bring me back then. It's been 2 years, so that's.
Oh, I'm ready to do that, Jerry. But you're going to have to be honest and answer the tough questions. I'm not going to do one of these puff piece interviews. I got to tell you that.
Well, don't worry. Nick, what do you got going?
Oh, Lord have mercy. That's
You're the
what I
only
got
one
going on.
working there anymore. Everybody's either out on leave or in the hospital or taking other positions. I mean, you're the one man.
There are times you feel like the last man standing, but that is fortunately a delusion on my part. We have Ryan P. Cruz and June Starkey and Jean Yamamura. But Lord have mercy, there are times you come into this office and you feel like, where is everybody? Where's the rest of me?
Well, come on, Nick. You get to traipse around with the Freemasons. Well, I got to go talk to the people on the Montecito Hot Springs Trail. I can't even find a place to park. So I think you're doing okay.
That story is such a great story.
That is a good story.
It's such a mess.
That is a good story. And it's, and I mean, the class implications and the, wealth redistribution. It's got all kind of good angles. All right, Nick Welsh of the Santa Barbara Independent, plenty of free parking, and Josh.
He's
Molina.
not of the Independent. He is the.
No.
We can say that. You don't have to.
Huh? What was your friend? Trickle of Drool? Was that?
Yeah, Trickle of Drool.
That's a good title for your memoir, I think. My life in American journalism.
Unfortunately, that is too much an accurate description of what comes out of my mouth.
All right. And with that, hey, I meant to ask, what does Mayor Lodge think about the plaza? We need to know her.
Look, I've decided never to mention, talk, or speak for Mayor Lodge again because I don't want
Okay,
a
let me just
10-page
say,
email.
Sheila does not get enough props, enough love, enough respect. She is awesome, and we are lucky to have her.
Amen.
And
I would agree with that, but I don't know what she thinks of the plaza.
All right. Well, if we can find out, then I'll know what I think about it. So with that, all right. Thanks again. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on.
alrighty.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh,
You're still recording, Jerry.